I emptied my entire savings account, all $87,000, to purchase an abandoned gas station that had been rotting on the edge of Mill Ridge since 1985. My parents called me delusional. My older brother Ethan laughed in my face and said I was throwing my life away on literal garbage. They had no idea what I would discover behind a false wall in the back of that storage room, something that would change everything. But before that, I need to explain how I got here. I grew up in Mill Ridge, a town where the definition of success was as clear as the welcome sign on Main Street. My father worked as a branch manager at North State Bank for 3 decades, and my mother taught advanced calculus at the local high school. In our family, achievement meant straight lines, good grades, a top university, a sensible job, a mortgage before 30. My brother Ethan embodied this blueprint so perfectly he could have been the face of a career coaching ad. Ivy League education, fast-track promotion, fiancée who performed pediatric surgeries while baking her own sourdough. Meanwhile, I was the family member they didn't know what to do with. I studied marketing at a state college, graduated with decent grades, and took a series of jobs that looked good on paper but hollowed me out inside. I worked at branded agencies writing copy for shampoos I didn't use and campaigns that promised happiness in exchange for aluminum and plastic. 5 years into that life, I found myself dreading Monday mornings the way one dreads a courtroom verdict. When I got laid off during a corporate restructuring, it was as though someone had quietly unlocked the cage I had long outgrown. But, of course, my family saw it differently. Over Sunday dinner, with Dad serving his usual overcooked roast and Ethan's girlfriend recounting her latest medical miracle, the atmosphere turned cold the moment I mentioned I had been let go. "This is what happens when you keep job hopping," my father said, not unkindly but firmly, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed for years. Ethan slid a business card across the table. "My firm's hiring. Entry level, but at least it's stable." I smiled politely, pocketed the card, and told them I had other interviews lined up. That was a lie. The truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of going back into another air-conditioned tomb of endless emails and birthday cupcakes in the break room. Driving home that night, I cried. Not quietly, not with dignity, but with the kind of grief that comes when you finally admit how lost you've become. I pulled over at the edge of town, let the tears come, and made a decision. I would find something that lit me up, not just paid me. 2 weeks later, I was driving back from a failed interview at a local insurance company when I took a detour to clear my head. That's when I saw it. An old gas station set back from the county road, choked by weeds and ivy, nearly invisible behind a leaning oak tree. The faded sign above the canopy read "Starlight Service" in chipped white paint. I slowed down. I parked. I got out. The air was thick with dust and memory. 2 rusted pumps stood like forgotten sentries at the edge of the cracked concrete lot. One had a wasp's nest tucked inside the nozzle. The windows were shattered, the door was boarded, and graffiti looped across the brick walls like careless handwriting. But beneath all that ruin, I saw something else. I saw arched doorways and tile inlays, a curved countertop through the grime. I saw potential. That night, I stayed up researching. The gas station had opened in 1958 and had once been a popular roadside stop before the interstate rerouted traffic. The owner, Harold Jenkins, had died without heirs, and the property had languished in foreclosure limbo for decades. It was occasionally listed but never sold. Too much liability, too many unknowns. I called the number on the rusting for sale sign the next morning. A real estate agent named Julia Myers answered. Her voice was surprised, skeptical. The Starlight? That place has been sitting since before I got my license. Are you interested in the land? Actually, I said, I'm interested in the building. I asked for a tour. That afternoon, she met me there with a giant ring of keys and a list of warnings. Underground tanks, possible contamination, structural damage. The bank is asking $90,000, she said, but honestly, they'd probably accept less. I didn't flinch. Inside, the building was a time capsule buried under decay. A vintage cash register, built-in wooden shelving, a checkered floor smudged with years of abandonment. In the back was a locked door. Storage room, she guessed. No key. I nodded, but something about that door stuck in my mind. I went home and began running numbers. Researched grants for brownfield cleanup. Looked into zoning exemptions. Talked to preservation groups. It wasn't just madness anymore. It was becoming a plan. A diner, a road trip attraction, a living piece of American history. Julia thought I had lost my mind. I thought I had finally found it. I offered 70. The bank countered with 75. I wired the money the next morning. When I told my family, the silence around the dinner table felt like a storm brewing. You spent your entire savings on that pile of junk? Ethan said, stunned. My mother touched my hand. Honey, you don't have to prove anything to us. I didn't reply. There was nothing I could say that would make them see what I saw. I signed the closing documents on a Tuesday morning. I walked out of the bank with a brass key and just enough cash left in my account to survive 8 weeks. I drove straight to the Starlight, unlocked the padlock, stepped inside. The air was thick with oil and mold. The building creaked like it was trying to warn me. I stood in the silence and whispered, I'm here. Let's see what we can do. The first few days were chaos. I bought gloves, masks, trash bags. I cleaned for 14 hours at a time, slept in my car behind the building because I had given notice at my apartment to save money. I peeled away decades of rot until I could see the beauty beneath. But the costs mounted fast. A burst pipe flooded the interior. The electrician found rodents in the walls. The environmental inspection nearly broke me. One morning, I arrived to find that someone had smashed a window and tagged the outside wall. Vandals. Local teens, probably. I sat down in the wreckage, surrounded by the mess I couldn't afford to fix, and cried into my knees. That evening, Ethan called. He had heard through a client that I was living out of my car. He offered help, a loan, a way out. I thanked him, said I needed to think. I didn't want to admit how close I was to accepting. That night, huddled in my sleeping bag with the cold seeping through the car seats, I made a decision. I would give myself one more week. One last chance to find something that justified this insanity. And if I couldn't, I'd swallow my pride and call him back. But first, I needed to see what was behind that locked door. The one at the back of the building, the one no one had bothered to open in almost 40 years. I found my crowbar, a can of WD-40, and a flashlight. Then I went to work. The door wasn't just stuck, it was sealed, like it didn't want to be opened, or maybe someone once wanted it kept shut forever. The hinges groaned under the weight of 40 years, and the wood splintered around the edges as I wedged the crowbar in deeper. Sweat dripped down my neck as I pushed, using every ounce of my frustration, disappointment, and fear until the frame cracked and the door gave way with a loud snap that echoed through the empty station. I stumbled back, catching myself on a shelf as dust billowed out from the dark gap beyond. I coughed, waved my hand, and clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the haze, revealing boxes, file cabinets, and shelving units, all cloaked in a thick film of gray. The smell was strange, musty like forgotten libraries and old garages, but underneath it was something else: leather, motor oil, a hint of something electric. I stepped over the broken frame, heart pounding. This was no ordinary storage closet. This was a vault of time. Everything inside was neatly arranged, like someone had cared about what was stored here, like it was more than junk. I opened the first box. Inside were maps, all folded and crisp dated: 1957, 1958, 1961, each one with annotations in blue pen, tracking route changes, traffic shifts, even weather notes. I opened another box. Old tools gleaming faintly under the dust and tags still attached. Then a stack of glossy black and white photos slid free from a torn envelope and scattered across the floor. I bent to pick them up, my breath catching as I saw the images: young men in pressed uniforms filling tanks, smiling families standing beside their Chevys, kids holding ice cream cones under the Starlight service sign, and in almost every photo, one consistent figure: a man with a thick mustache and coveralls. Harold Jenkins, the original owner, sometimes posing proudly, sometimes in the background, always there as if he had tethered himself to this place for eternity. I sat down on an overturned crate, flipping through each photo with trembling fingers. This wasn't just memorabilia. This was memory, preserved alive, carefully cataloged, and then sealed away for someone else to find. Maybe someone like me. I pushed further into the room, weaving between towers of storage bins. When my flashlight beam caught something reflective in the corner, I turned and froze. It looked like part of a pump, the curved glass top shimmering faintly under the dust. I pushed a shelf aside and gasped. 4 pristine, vintage gas pumps stood in a row, lined up like art pieces. Each one intact, gleaming slightly under the grime. With Art Deco curves and polished chrome, they looked like sculptures from another time. I moved closer and ran my hand along one, its metal cool and solid. The nameplate read Starlight Model 58 Limited Edition. I had seen a photo of one like this in a collector forum. They were rare, extremely rare. Then I noticed the back wall, not a wall at all, but another partition I gently pushed, and it creaked open, revealing what could only be described as a private museum: shelves lined with old oil cans, signs, maps, and parts. Each item tagged, labeled, and protected in plastic sleeves. In the center, a framed document mounted behind glass caught my eye. I approached, slowly, squinting through the grime. My heart stopped. It was a certificate from the National Roadway Heritage Foundation dated 1977, officially recognizing the Starlight gas station as a designated historic site on Route 66. I blinked it 3 times to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Route 66, the mother road, the artery of American travel, a cultural icon. Tourists from all over the country still chased remnants of it, and my gas station was part of that history. I staggered back, overwhelmed, and sat down on the nearest stool. This changed everything. The gas pumps alone were probably worth thousands, maybe more, to collectors. But the designation was something else entirely. It opened doors to grants, to national preservation funding, to tourism. I scrambled for my phone, snapped dozens of photos, and emailed them to myself. Then I Googled every collector group I could find. By midnight, I had joined 3 forums, messaged 2 experts, and bookmarked 5 applications for historic grants. The next morning, I called Greg Peterson, a name that had come up repeatedly in the vintage memorabilia community. He picked up with a gravelly voice. "This is Greg. Hi, this is Camille Foster. I own a gas station in Millridge, Ohio, and I think I have something you'll want to see. Vintage gas pumps, Starlight models from the 50s in near mint condition." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "Starlight 58s. Those are unicorns. Where did you say you found them? In a hidden room behind a false wall. I bought the station 2 weeks ago, and I think the previous owner sealed everything in Greg, arrived the next day in a weathered pickup with license plates that read Oil for Life. He was short round and wore suspenders over a Route 66 tee. His eyes widened the second he stepped inside and saw the pumps. "Holy moly," he whispered, approaching one like it was a religious artifact. He circled it twice, ran a cloth along its side, and then looked at me like I had just handed him the Holy Grail. "This alone," he said, pointing, "is worth at least 10 grand, maybe more to the right buyer. What if I sell you 2 and keep 2 for display?" "I asked you serious?" He blinked. "You want to open this to the public?" "Yes. Eventually a diner, a museum, a roadside stop." Greg smiled slowly. "I love it." He wrote me a check for $20,000 on the spot, and before he left, he connected me with the Route 66 Heritage Society. By the end of the week, I had 3 more meetings lined up and a plan to get my property officially relisted for its historical value. It was the first moment since buying the station that I felt not only hope but confidence it was happening. I wasn't just rebuilding a building, I was resurrecting a legacy. I didn't tell my family. Not yet. This was mine, and I needed to protect it from their doubt for a little while longer. I got to work using Greg's check to pay off the environmental testing and begin repairs on the roof. I hired local tradesmen, negotiated discounts, and bartered where I could. A retired electrician named Donnie agreed to rewire the place if I helped him set up an exhibit for his car club. In the future diner, I said yes. Without hesitation, little by little, the Starlight came alive again. The original tiles gleamed. The windows were replaced. The neon sign was repaired and mounted back onto the canopy, though we hadn't powered it yet. I would stare at it every night as I ate dinner on the hood of my car, waiting for the day it would glow again. The community began to notice Ted from the hardware store, dropped off a box of vintage knobs from his basement. His niece painted a mural of classic cars on one of the side walls. The mayor even stopped by to say the council might consider a tourism grant. If I kept progressing, I smiled, nodded, and kept my secret close. Then, one afternoon, as I was scrubbing the exterior bricks, I heard tires crunch on gravel and looked up to see a familiar SUV parked at the edge of the lot. My heart sank. It was my family, Ethan, my parents, and even Stephanie, the pediatric super fiancé. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" Mom lifted a folded newspaper. The Millridge Gazette had run a feature on the station with a photo of me standing in front of the pumps. "The place looks so different," Dad said, scanning the site. "I almost didn't recognize it. Can we take a look?" I led them on a tour, cautious and quiet, showing them the diner area, the display cabinets, the restored sign. When I brought them to the hidden room, they gasped. "This was all hidden," Ethan said, his voice finally shedding its usual arrogance. I nodded. The look on his face wasn't disbelief anymore. It was something closer to admiration for a long moment. No one spoke, Then Dad reached out and touched the edge of a restored pump. "You really did this," he said softly. "I really did." I answered, "and I'm just getting started." It took them a while to leave that day. They kept walking back into the different rooms of the Starlight like they didn't trust their eyes, like they needed to confirm it again and again that what stood before them was real. When they finally pulled out of the gravel lot, I remained outside, leaning against one of the freshly painted columns, watching the sunset turn the sky gold, then crimson, then lavender. I didn't cry, I thought I might, but instead I felt something different. Not relief, not triumph, something deeper, something like peace. I had been chasing approval for so long I didn't recognize what it felt like when I no longer needed it. The weeks that followed passed in a blur, a steady rhythm of sanding, painting, measuring, negotiating, ordering vintage decor, waiting for deliveries, writing social media posts, balancing the books, finding ways to stretch every dollar of my remaining budget into $5 of impact. I began building a presence online, documenting the restoration process, sharing photos of the neon sign being relit, the restored tile floors, the before and after comparisons, and slowly something magical happened. People started caring. Strangers messaged me with memories of the Starlight from their childhood. Some remembered stopping there with their parents during road trips. Some offered to donate items from the 50s to add to the museum. Some sent small contributions to support the project. A woman named Teresa from New Mexico mailed me her grandfather's Route 66 postcards with a handwritten note that said, "I believe in what you're doing." It felt like the world was whispering back, "We see you, we believe too." Local businesses noticed as well. The Brew Shed created a special Route 66 ale to be sold exclusively at the Starlight. The bakery down the road developed a cookie set shaped like vintage road signs. Even Ted from the hardware store, who used to watch me from behind the counter with a skeptical frown, now gave me advice on ventilation systems and helped install new light fixtures for free. The tide had turned. The Starlight was no longer just my project, it was becoming a community story, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was walking alone. The museum displays began taking shape. Greg returned with a few more pieces on loan from his collection, including a rare oil can rack and a restored wall clock from a 1955 station in Arizona. I spent evenings designing the exhibit cards, hand-lettering each one carefully with dates, facts, and anecdotes. Harold Jenkins. The man whose legacy I had stumbled into was slowly coming alive through every photo, every receipt, every note, scribbled in the margins of his ledgers. He had cataloged everything. The man was meticulous, and now I was determined to honor that precision. One night while painting the trim on the windows, a historically accurate turquoise shade I had uncovered under 8 layers of old paint. I saw another car pull into the lot. My stomach clenched again, but this time it wasn't my family. It was a vintage convertible, a pale yellow Chevrolet from the late 50s. The driver stepped out, an older gentleman with salt and pepper hair, a bow tie, and a posture so straight it looked practiced. He held a folder under one arm, and when he spoke, his voice had the texture of gravel smoothed by time. "Miss Foster," he said, "I believe you've become quite familiar with my father's collection." I froze. "You're Harold Jenkins, Jr." He nodded with a smile and extended his hand. I should have come sooner, but life, as it often does, got in the way. I returned to Millridge 2 weeks ago and only just learned about what you've done here. I didn't know Harold had any family, I said quickly. I thought he didn't have heirs. I was his only son, but we were estranged. I left Millridge when I was 21. We lost touch. He never mentioned me in legal documents, and by the time I tried to come back to sort his estate, the bank had already claimed the property, and it was tied up in bureaucracy. He looked around, his gaze softening. This was my childhood playground. I pumped gas here as a boy, cleaned the windshield of every car that stopped in rain or shine. I can't believe it's still standing. I led him through the property slowly. He didn't speak much, but his eyes glistened behind his glasses when we reached the hidden room and he saw what had been preserved. The vintage pumps, the framed designation certificate, the display cases filled with his father's painstakingly cataloged treasures. He placed a hand gently on one of the pumps and whispered under his breath, "Dad would have loved this." We sat for nearly an hour afterward, and he told me stories. I never expected about Harold Jenkins, the collector, the romantic, the man who once gave free gas to soldiers heading off to boot camp and left handmade toy cars for children during Christmas. I had come to feel a connection to Harold through his belongings, but hearing about his quirks, his jokes, his fierce devotion to Route 66 made him more human, more real. I asked Jenkins Jr. if he wanted the collection back, if he wanted to reclaim his father's legacy, and he smiled, shook his head, and said, "No, you've done something I never could. You brought this place back to life, and in doing so, you gave my father the ending he deserved. Please, keep it. It's yours." I promised him I would protect it, and I meant every word. The next morning, I submitted the final application for a historic preservation grant complete with photos of the restored architecture records of the collection and statements from Route 66 historians. Within 10 days, I was notified the Starlight had officially been relisted as a protected historical site and that I had qualified for a matching grant for up to $100,000. Suddenly, everything accelerated. I could afford to finish restoring the diner, install plumbing in the guest bathrooms, and even hire a part-time staff for opening day. The local press ran a second story titled "From Ruin to Revival," and just like that, the Starlight was no longer just a dream. It was a destination. As opening day approached, I sent out invitations to everyone who had helped along the way. Greg, Julia, the tradesman, my bakery partners, even my old boss from the hardware store. I didn't send one to my family, but I figured word would reach them, and sure enough, the morning before the grand opening, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot, and out stepped my parents. Ethan and Stephanie, dressed like they were attending a wedding, not a roadside diner. Ethan took off his sunglasses, slowly surveying the painted building, the cleaned-up lot, the glowing neon sign that now hummed to life every evening. They didn't say much at first, just walked through the property, nodding, touching surfaces quietly, reading the exhibit cards in the museum area. Finally, in the middle of the diner, as I adjusted the placement of the last set of silverware, Ethan cleared his throat. "This looks good, Camille, more than good, honestly. It's impressive." Mom stood beside him, tears in her eyes. "Your father and I are proud of you." Her voice cracked, and Dad looked away as if embarrassed by the emotion. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a lump in my throat, too big to swallow. Ethan pulled something from his briefcase, a magazine, American Road. It had my face and the Starlight on the cover with the headline, "Mother Road, Miracle." I blinked. "You've seen it." He nodded. "My firm represents one of their advertisers. They sent me an advance copy. I thought you might want to see it before it hits newsstands." I held the magazine in my hands like it was glass. I had worked so hard for this moment, and now that it was here, I didn't know how to hold it. Ethan stepped closer. You know, there are investors asking questions about what you've done here. They're wondering if it could be replicated other towns, other abandoned stops along Route 66. You could franchise this if you wanted." I laughed softly. "Let me survive the first month, then we'll talk. But thank you seriously for coming. It means more than—" You know, when they left that day, I didn't feel small or defensive or inferior. I felt grounded, strong, and whole, because no matter what came next, the most important restoration had already happened. Not just the starlight, but me. The morning of the grand opening arrived with a sky so blue it felt unreal, the kind of sky that made you believe in new beginnings. I had barely slept the night before, pacing through the finished diner, triple-checking table placements, rereading every exhibit card in the museum, dusting surfaces that were already spotless when I finally stepped outside just after 5 a.m. My eye froze. A line of vintage cars stretched along County Road 8, gleaming chrome-polished hoods, white-walled tires parked in careful rows like a spontaneous car show had sprung up. Overnight owners were unpacking folding chairs, coolers, and camera gear. Someone had brought a speaker playing old rockabilly tracks. As I walked past a man polishing the side of a candy apple red Chevrolet, Bel Air looked up and smiled. "Hope you don't mind," he said. "We heard what you were doing here. Figured the Starlight deserved a proper revival." I choked back tears and nodded, unable to find words. I walked to the front of the station, stared up at the restored neon sign now fully operational and glowing faintly in the early morning light. It felt like the building was breathing again, like its heart had started beating after decades of silence. By 7, the lot was full. People from town, tourists, collectors, news crews, everyone buzzing with excitement. The mayor arrived in a dark suit and sunglasses, stepping onto the small platform we'd built near the diner entrance and delivering a speech about history, commerce, and community. I barely heard a word of it. My hands were shaking, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Then he called me up. Presented a plaque from the city council officially recognizing the Starlight Revival Project as a milestone in Millridge's cultural preservation. I stood before the crowd, holding the plaque, unable to believe that just months ago, this entire property had been covered in graffiti and rodents. Now here we were, standing in celebration of not just a restoration but a resurrection. When the ribbon was cut, the crowd surged forward. People filled the diner, every booth occupied within minutes. I'd partnered with a local chef named Donna, who had created a simple menu of burgers, grilled cheese, milkshakes, and cherry pie. We served over 200 meals in the first 3 hours. The museum area saw visitors drifting slowly, reading about Harold Jenkins touching the original tools he once used, taking photos of the Route 66 maps and vintage pumps. One older couple stood hand in hand before a framed picture of Harold at the grand opening in 1958. The woman whispering, "I remember stopping here when I was 10. I couldn't stop smiling." Lizzie, my marketing assistant, ran past me, breathless. "Our hashtag is trending in 3 states, she whispered. "We've had over 600 reposts in the last hour, and CNN Travel just sent a DM. I blinked. "What, CNN?" She nodded. "They want to feature us in their American Nostalgia Road Trip series." I stumbled back into the diner, sat on a stool and laughed, not because it was funny, but because the sheer overwhelming wave of it all was crashing into me at once, and somehow I was still standing mid-afternoon. I saw them. My parents standing near the museum entrance chatting with tourists. Dad wore a polo with the Starlight logo. Mom had a copy of the Gazette tucked under her arm. They looked relaxed, proud, even like this was a world they'd always belonged to. Ethan arrived shortly. After, in a tan blazer, greeting me with a firm handshake and a sideways smile. "So you did it, Camille. You really pulled it off." I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him I was still scared every night, still unsure what next month would bring. Instead, I just smiled and said, "Yeah, I did." He pulled out his phone, showed me a spreadsheet. "Several investors are ready to talk if you want to scale this concept. Multiple historic gas stations, a franchise built on restoration tourism." I paused, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm not saying no, but not yet. I want to build this right, not fast." He nodded, surprisingly, not pushing. Then he handed me a folder, a copy of the American Road magazine article, inside 6 full pages of glossy photos, a headline that read, "Mother Road Miracle," and a pull quote that made me tear up again. This time, not from doubt, but from something closer to arrival. Camille Foster didn't just rebuild a gas station. She resurrected a piece of forgotten America around 5 o'clock as the sun began. Lowering into golden hour, I stepped out to the front of the property where a small crowd had gathered for one final moment, the ceremonial relighting of the neon arrow, the sign that had once marked the starlight on maps from California to Missouri. I stood at the switch, looked out at the faces in the crowd, some familiar, some complete strangers, all waiting silently. When I flipped it on, the arrow buzzed, then bloomed into light, casting blue and yellow hues across the parking lot, and the people burst into applause. It was louder than I expected, louder than anything I'd ever heard for me. I stood there, soaking it in, eyes wet, hands trembling, heart full, the same structure that had once echoed only with dust and decay, now pulsed with life, with meaning, with hope as the sky darkened and the sign kept glowing. I thought about Harold Jenkins, his meticulous record keeping his hidden room, his passion preserved like a gift waiting for someone like me to find it. I thought about the night I sat crying in my car, unsure if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, about every nail I hammered, every dollar I spent, every doubt I swallowed just to reach this moment. And then I thought about what came next. Not the investors, not the expansion, not the headlines, but the quiet, steady work of showing up every day to keep this place alive, to welcome strangers into a story older than any of us, to remind people that history isn't just preserved in museums. It's waiting inside boarded-up buildings on forgotten highways, waiting for someone to believe enough to look a little closer. As the crowd began to thin, a familiar voice called my name. I turned and saw Mr. Jenkins, Harold's son, standing near the pumps. He held a small box in his hands. "I thought you might want this," he said. "It's not much, but it belonged to my dad." I opened the box. Inside was a keychain, aged brass, shaped like a star, with the initials HJ engraved in the center, and a note folded neatly beneath it. It read, "If you're reading this, then maybe you saw what I saw. Thanks for not letting it all fade away." I closed the box and held it to my chest, nodding, unable to speak. The sky turned to twilight. The neon arrow pointing upward lit the dark like a beacon. And I realized then that this place wasn't just a project or a business or a rebellion. It was a second chance. Not just for the starlight, but for me. I walked to the edge of the lot, looked down the stretch of county road that once connected strangers across 1,000 miles, and whispered to no one in particular, "Welcome, traveler. The light's still on and the road's still open."